Hi, this is Simon. This is part 5 of our series on databending and datamoshing audio. So now we've got some Databent sounds, and I want to talk a little bit about how we might use them expressively. There's a huge range of creative possibilities with these sounds, so I have no interest in presenting you with a list of rules. Instead, let's talk about some big ideas, and then I'll show you some examples. Remember now that we're creating these sounds either from data that wasn't intended to be heard as audio, or by manipulating audio data with programs that weren't designed to do so. For me, this really draws our attention to the technology and its imperfections. In the mid-20th century, Marcus McLuhan claimed, "The medium is the message," meaning that how a message is communicated, what technology is used to communicate it, conveys as much information as the message itself. Through our data bending, we're making the digital media of art and sound the primary message. Also in data bending and datamoshing, we're repurposing technology for artistic expression, perhaps beyond the intention of its design. There's very little new about this idea. Musique Concrète out of France in the late 1940s were audio collages made with tape recorders that were originally used for communication during the war. We could even set aside the source of these sounds coming from data and embrace them as pure sonic objects. Instead of considering the cyberpunk aesthetics, we can rejoice in the absolute originality of the sound itself, an idea that Cox calls sonic ontology. Thinking about these sounds, of course we can just play them as is. We can embrace that randomness, the lack of control, and double down on that as our creative expression. In most of the work I do, though, I like to look for the bright spots. I like to explore these original sounds and find the best materials I can. Here's an example of a kind of sci-fi sound design. I've used some Databent and Datamosh sounds to make a laser sound. Here's what it sounds like. I started with a synthesized laser sound here, which is not terribly interesting, but then I bounced that out once, and I used our Photoshop trick to Datamosh that. Here's a before. Here's an after. And so there was a lot of glitchy sounds in there, but I just took a small part, and that sounds like this. Now, I've run this through a tape delay and an EQ. I often find it's very good to EQ these sounds because you'll end up with quite a bit of sub-audio sometimes. In addition to that glitch, I also ran it through the hex editor, and I got some of our MP3 artifact sounds. You can hear that pop right there. And then this here is just our Databent kick from the first video. Again, also running through a tape delay. Putting them all together. And this is another synthy sound, by the way. Thinking about this in context. Could be a very effective laser sound, again, embracing that sci-fi aesthetic. And this is a science fiction aesthetic that's less a clean sort of Star Wars-y type sound and more of a dingy cyberpunk Blade Runner kind of sound. We're embracing the glitch, we're embracing the errors. Another fun thing that I think worked well is this sound design from the Welcome to the Future track. So I'm using Logic here, but Logic isn't particularly important. I could be doing all of this in Pro Tools, in Reaper, or even in Audacity. Anything that's going to let me multi-track my audio. Here, listen to this.
Welcome to the future.
Just to focus in on that, let's just do the voice parts.
Welcome to the future.
What's going on here is I have the undatabent part and the databent part playing simultaneously. But you can hear I've placed this sort of back in the audio space. I did that by increasing the reverb mix and rolling off some of the high frequencies, if you're interested in looking at that. This is the EQ for that, whereas this is the EQ for the undatamosh version.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future.
And it's nice because you get the sort of comprehensible version playing simultaneously with the Databent version.
Updating your profile.
So the Databent version almost becomes like an echo of the initial sound.
Updating your profile.
Finally, I want to talk about the Databend Keytar that I played in the previous video. This combines ideas of the third video of this series, bringing a raw file into a buffer in Pure Data, and live granulation from part 6 of my Pure Data videos. I don't want to get too into this because I don't want to presuppose a knowledge of Pure Data. If you have questions, please let me know or drop me a message in the comments. Basically, what's happening is I have a metro that goes and bangs all of these grains, causing them to play from the Databend buffer that we've gotten in here. All I've done now is, instead of randomly selecting a start time in our Databent buffer, I'm controlling the start time based on what keys I'm pressing on the keyboard. So if I start this granulator going, we don't hear anything until I press a key. And based on the different keys that I press on the keyboard, it goes to different spots in the buffer. Of course, these keys aren't actually associated with any real notes, just time locations. The range of keys on my Keytar only goes from 53 to 84, so I mapped that accordingly. And that's how I came up with all of the math going down here, to map the size of the buffer to the range of 53 to 84. I'm taking the velocity of the keys, so the grains only sound when I have a key pressed down. Finally, I'm also taking the pitch bend here. You can see as I move that pitch bend up and down, those numbers change. I use this to randomize the start time of each of those grains. Send randomize. Here inside the grain, it receives it here and then randomizes the start time passed in accordingly. So I am kind of embracing the randomness of I can't play this like an actual keyboard, but I'm also engaging my musicianship. After a little practice, I know which keys produce which sounds, and I can make musical strategies in crafting a piece. I hope that gives you some ideas on how you might use these Databent sounds expressively, but there's much more to explore. Have some fun, and please feel free to share what you come up with in the comments.